the thing that I always hammer with integrators is like, don't piss off future you. For the love of God, don't piss off future you. When you come back 3 years later and you've lost 2 of those people, or you've had 50 jobs in between, and now you've lost all of that, top of the head information, you're hosed.
You know who I think could handle a problem like that?
Who?
Future Ted and future Marshall.
Totally. Let's let those guys handle it.
Damn it, past Ted.
Outsourcing programming versus in-house programmers. It's an age-old debate, and it probably will never end. On this episode, we'll be talking about how to best use in-house and outsourced resources from integrators who have had plenty of experience doing so. All that and more on A State of Control. A State of Control, episode 115, Better Business Operators. Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control programming and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So today's topic is something that I've actually been involved with for quite some time and is really an age-old conversation in the AV industry, and it's whether or not to outsource programming. And we won't really give you answers to that, but we'll have a conversation about it. And we have 2 guests that will be able to weigh in on it from the integration perspective. And before I introduce them to you, I'd like to say hi to my partner here at A State of Control, Rich Fregosa. How are you, Rich?
I'm doing good, buddy. And I'm just going to say, even though you're not going to be one to say it, we're very glad that you are feeling much better. And so you recovered from ISC, and it's always good to see you. I'm just glad that you're up and about now. So you're looking good.
Thanks so much. And you were a shining light for me, and I appreciate that and appreciate all the support. And so if my voice is a little bit weak, I had a little bit of a sickness after ISC that I'll be able to fill people in on, but I'm glad to be back and recovering nicely. So I'd like to shift over and say hi to 2 new guests, and they're people that I've gotten to know a bit through the industry. The first one comes to us from Verrex, and he is the Assistant Vice President of Engineering Services. We kind of know each other probably since he started in the industry, and that was quite some time ago. He's Ben Dandola-Grubb. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the invitation. We probably first met back in 2005. It's been a while now.
Yeah, I remember you starting out, and you've really made a big impact. So kudos to you, and I look forward to you contributing on the show.
Thanks.
And secondly, somebody who I've met both through social media. We actually got to meet in person just recently at the Total Tech Summit, and we've connected a lot about business topics. So looking forward to continuing that discussion. And he is Alex Fortin, and he is from NDS Integration, the president of NDS Integration. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, thanks so much, Steve. It's a deep pleasure to be here with you today and talking about this subject.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. So as I said before, we really, the conversation about independent programming, outsourcing programming, freelancing, and versus keeping programming in-house has been an age-old debate. And it's something that there is really no answer. Everybody looks at things differently, but there are certainly different ways to go about making those relationships work well. And I think that that's really what needs to be discussed, and as well as how to accomplish successfully getting programming done. So there are many different avenues to go down, and also many different flavors of programmers out there. But Rich, I wanted to see if you could start the conversation off, and I know that you'll probably have a lot you can add on this. Is what makes the idea of outsourcing programming challenging for some and successful for others?
I think the biggest hurdle initially for integrators is that they feel that they can't control the process, right? It's always about, we can't control the quality coming out, or we don't know these people, or if we've heard about these people, or what if our schedule changes, or our clients expect X, or our culture is Y. And, a lot of it is based upon initially on not understanding, the people involved. And And some integrators have been burned by independent companies as well. And so you factor those things together, and depending on how long you've been doing it, depending on your market, depending on the size, scale, and scope of the work that you do, the first part, and typically if it's a smaller integrator, it's much, I see the same thing in resi as I see in commercial, right? They have a founder who's kind of the jack of all trades, who knows everything about everything, and the hardest thing that they can do is learn how to delegate. So the first step is learning how to delegate internally, and then building up their people. And then the next step after that is learning how to delegate externally. And we've always talked about it. Those wind up becoming business decisions and culture decisions, which is, how are you going to get things done? How are you going to grow a project? And are you more concerned about staying, is that whole pie, right? Because again, it goes to profit, right? Well, gosh, if I've got a project that I've signed on for X, and if I'm, and I've got profit centers on the hardware here, well, if I'm paying a person over here X amount a week, well, that's kind of free money. This interesting math starts going in, right? We'll call it integrator math, right? I made it here. The same way the clients are, right? Well, I bought it. Isn't the programming included? It's easy for the integrator to feel that, because they may have somebody on staff, but they don't take it from a project level. And what we normally suggest is, when you are going to be doing something other than pre-commissioning or a configurable system, right? And we've talked about it a lot of times before. There's configured systems and there's programmed systems. Configured systems, you should be training your field engineers. You should have your PMs involved in that, right? You should even have your salespeople involved in that, honestly, because how are you going to learn the actual time it takes to get a job to the end in a situation like that? Now, in a program system where you're dealing with, a whole lot of other variables to work with, you have to kind of step away and go, okay, what is the cost of this project? Let's take all the people away from it, whether internal or external. And, how are we going to get from here to there? And then you break it down. And at that point you go, okay, well, is it cost effective to be internal? The other times, it's great to be off. One of the things that we've always found success with integrators is that the good news is, say you're delayed by 2 days or whatever it is, I'm not on the clock. I've rescheduled. I have the ability to retask and come back. If you've got somebody there, you're still paying them. They now may be twiddling their thumbs. So what you thought was a net gain is actually a net loss, because you're dealing with things that, maybe doesn't require an on-site presence, or there's pre-commissioning or pre-programming or things that can happen that free you up. And so it's a tough conversation, because again, a lot of people who get into this industry like the technical side. And because they like the technical side, and because it's generally populated by smart people, they figure, well, I can do it, right? How hard must it be? And that tends to be the trap, rather than focusing on specializing on what you need to do. It's always a great conversation. What we found is typically after the fact, and our good friend Mark Levesque will tell you, all of a sudden you find out at times that when you partner, because you can do a hybrid version as well, it helps everybody get to the finish line. And we've always talked about it, is that, especially if you're in the executive management, get in, get out, get paid, right? And get it done once, so that you don't have to come back.
Yeah, you raised some really interesting points, Rich. I think, we're going through a big change here in a society. We're seeing, work from home and education system changing, and we should also be looking at our own AV integration businesses, right? And so from that aspect, what we need to do is we need to rely on people that have expert knowledge in that sphere of influence, and also focus on outcomes rather than the process, right? So when we think about it from a work perspective, historically, it's always been time-based. We're measuring people by the amount of time, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, that type of thing. And with work from home, we're shifting to, outcome-based management. And we need to do the same thing within our own silos of business. And I think programming is one of those things as well, where what we're paying a outsourced programmer for is an outcome. And whether that take them, 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 hours, 3 minutes, from a business perspective, we can associate a cost and achieve an outcome with that. And I think that as our businesses grow and morph and try to provide more stability on outcomes for our clients, that's going to become a more and more important factor. So, yeah, I think you raised some excellent points.
For me, I'll start by saying I am not a programmer, but internally at my company, at very least, the programming team all reports up through me. And at least I like to tell myself that I could potentially argue the point here for internal versus external programming either way, because I absolutely see pluses and minuses to both sides of this equation. And one of the things that Rich got me thinking before is that sometimes things just happen organically, but it's really important we take a step back and say, even those things that just happened were a decision. I may not have realized I made the decision, but every little thing is a decision, through all of life. So I've never been burned. Rich used that word before, by external programming from a control house. And we've had pluses and minuses on both sides of this. So for me, if everything is in-house, everything can be real time, which also allows for things to be a little bit looser in the planning, which is not a good thing. And then when I'm working with an external programmer, I have to have all of my ducks in a row and be ready, which means that I have done my job even better because I've defined system functionality. I've determined what the users are going to expect and documented that as best I can, at the very least, to hand off to that programmer. Where if it were in-house, I can be a little bit looser about what I deliver. And the results could have more variance in that respect as well.
Yeah, you raise an excellent point, Ben. I think that's what I was alluding to, is that, in order for our companies to grow and do things efficiently, we have to control more of those expectations and outcomes, right? So when you have an in-house programmer, you can kind of throw them at a project and be like, well, we don't really need to figure it out. We'll just figure it out on the fly. And we got Steve or Rich or Ben in there, and they can just kind of work away at it. And we've already allocated him as a salary or an FTE, then it doesn't really matter. We know that it's going to get done and the client's going to be happy. But, as we scale our companies and as we grow to provide better outcomes for our clients, we need to be better business operators, and we need to really understand all facets from bottom to the top of what that process looks like and delve in. And I think that we need to do some hard evaluations as integrators to say, are we really the best at this? Is Ben really the best person for this job? Or should we be looking at outsourcing this to Rich and have Ben sit as a project manager overseeing 3 or 4 Riches so that we can get the projects done faster, recoup our costs faster, be able to reinvest into other areas of the company that are important to us, like our employees or our community or et cetera, and be able to expedite the project process and be able to turn those projects much faster with a higher likelihood of success. So these are all really great questions and should be answered by every smart AV integrator operator.
What I've also seen with internal programming is that we can use them as a benefit, but also as a crutch, because programmers tend to be very smart, very technical people who learn not just the programming, but other things very quickly. So that means that if I have a question, they might have learned it or picked it up from helping someone troubleshoot along the way. So a programmer could naturally become tech support. And that's really not what we want programmers to be doing. But it's a natural occurrence, at least from my experience, that happens over time as well.
Totally, Ben. I think, it's the nature of programming, right? You can't just pick someone out of your team and, send them through a programming education course. Like they need a senior to learn from and learn all the gotchas. And if you think about a subject matter expert, like an external programmer or programming team that's doing this Monday to Friday, all day, all hours, they're going to know all the gotchas. And quite frankly, one of the biggest cost centers as an AV integrator is figuring out the gotchas in a project, whether that be a new product that we're trying to integrate with. And even though it says that, your manufacturer's rep says it should work, we all know that most of the time there's going to be little gotchas you have to figure out. Why not pay a company or a team that already knows all that and has all that experience to be able to execute that project flawlessly for you?
Rich, I think you should comment on that a bit, because I know one of the things that you try to do, and I've experienced it myself, is that it's almost like you work yourself out of a job where you're working with an integrator, you're helping them strengthen their team, you're helping them make their team bring somebody up that can learn from you as you're working with them and servicing their needs and working on a project. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting in that 3 decades in, I've yes, I have worked myself out of jobs. And then as those teams have grown and have moved on to run their own companies or senior positions in other companies, I then, it's kind of like the Godfather, right? I thought I was out and then they pulled me back in. Next thing you know, another project happens. And the people that you groomed and brought up and created new proteges have now moved on to other parts of their career. So the fun part is you get to start all over again. And see, for me, everybody laughs about it, I love collaborating. I love when I work with the integrators, and again, because I get to do bespoke resi and I get to do commercial, the first thing out of my mouth anytime that I have a new partnership we're working, I'm like, find me your greenest person. Find them for me. Find your field engineer who's the Ross. Find your installer. Find your programmer. Because that way we can sit down and I can help you establish a culture. I can help you establish best practices. There is some benefit to, like what Ben was saying, is that if you're bringing in somebody who's already accomplished what they do it day in and day out, and if it's the right fit between companies, you're going to grow. You're going to raise each other's level on a project by project basis. And that's the thing, is that it's the hardest part is getting over the first one. And where I've seen third-party programmers have become successful is, and you've got two choices, because again, it comes down to your business personality. There are some companies and integrators, programmers, wherever they are, that they come in and they say, this is how I do it. I have a certain way. And because analytic people kind of have process, and depending on where they are sometimes in the spectrum, they don't like being off of the process. That may not always be a best fit. Maybe that is why, an internal team works, and because you can kind of stay between the lines there. But if you have, that organic relationship, it's the ability to be able to say, okay, let's all talk about what we're not good at. Now let's focus on how can we bridge those and cover for each other. So by the end, it looks great. I've learned something. You've learned something. And the adaptability. And I found that the good third-party companies are highly adaptable. The first thing that we come in when I meet an integrator, I'm like, what's your communication method? Do you use Slack? Do you use Google Meet? Do you use Team? What's your process? Fold us into your process. We're not going to create a whole new process for you. We're going to come in. Sometimes they'll come in with integrators like, we don't got one. Great. First thing that we do is we'll go ahead and just teach them the basics of unified communication with GDocs, right? All of a sudden, a repository for information. So there's the value proposition is, how does the programming bed get built upon for the next one and the next one and the next one? And it's hard to quantify it sometimes. But when you reach a successful end goal and you have people coming through, because again, the nature of this industry, again, is that you want to be able to, in essence, build your competition. If you're doing it well, that's what you've done, is you've groomed your competition. And that's nothing to be afraid of, because again, there's enough projects out there. There really are. We just kind of get worried about, oh my gosh, is my slice of that pie going to go away? And so, I think that at this point, and Steve's the same way, is that our whole goal is that there's, we're pushing on the other side of the hill of our careers. So now there's got to be other people that have to fill those gaps and hopefully maintain, the kind of carrying the torch of what we started with.
One of the things I see quite often in established integrators is, to your point, Rich, trying to get a bigger slice of the pie. And I think what you see from, a company like mine, NDS, which is, aggressive growth mode, is let's just build a bigger pie. Let's build bigger slices, bigger pie for everybody. And, I remember, some of the books I read as a youngster in business, even though I'm not that old, but I've been doing this since 2001 in business. So is really creating win-win-win relationships, right? So that's where, not only do we win as an AV integrator, but our customers win, our vendor partners win, our employees win. And, some may argue that that is unachievable, but I can attest that it 100% is. And the only way you can do that is by relying on each other for your expertise and being able to, be able to see that bigger pie grow, so everyone can have a bigger slice.
I agree. There's enough space for all of us to play in this integration game. And Rich, you were saying about looking for the green person who you can teach. That's such a tremendous and important attitude that we could all take. And all need to be doing better because somebody else has to take up the torch. I still have plenty of road ahead of me doing this AV career, but we need to be training and teaching more younger people to come up with it within the industry as well here.
To me, what I take away from what Rich said too is that the relationship that can be formed is more than just getting the project done or more than just programming. It's being a business together and being able to be stronger at providing integration, because I know from my experience that we too try to leave a mark in helping companies improve and helping them adopt some of the things that we do. And I know for a fact some integrators that we work with have used our processes and don't use us anymore, which is okay. But it's that type of thing that the value that you provide as an independent programming company goes far beyond just the transaction of getting the project done and doing the programming. I kind of wanted to talk to Ben too about this hybrid approach, because I know that we've worked together as companies and it's been a while, but I'm sure that there's still some outsourcing that can occur from time to time, even though you have in-house programmers. Talk a little bit about what that looks like, and is that something that's comfortable for your team?
My company's approach for the past, I'll call it 15 years, has been primarily in-house programming, and we also work with third-party programmers. And the decision to go one way or the other is often, honestly, bid related in terms of how you win the project. But there is absolutely value in delivering through a third-party programmer a very consistent product, because not every one of my company's clients, they don't work exclusively with us. Some of them do, but they're deploying systems throughout the world. And one of the absolute best way for 100% consistency is to use a third-party programmer. Integrator number one may be installing in one city and then 10,000 miles away, so there may be a completely different integrator. Why not use that same programmer worldwide and have that consistent user experience, which should be our goal across the board for every one of our clients, whether it's in-house or not.
Yeah, consistent documentation too, right? Not only is it going to be a consistent outcome, like the UI is going to be the same and the programming should be the same, but all the way from start to finish. And I think that's one of the advantages you get with third-party programming is that it's a consistent outcome. And that's really, for some clients, they don't care. They're like, if it does what it's supposed to do, but for some enterprise level clients, Ben, and I'm sure you have many of those and would agree that they're paying you for consistent outcomes, reliable consistency. And sometimes they're paying at a premium to get that, right? And that's when you need to be able to have, that's where you need to be able to control all the things that you can control. And I think programming can be one of those things. I think also one of the things we haven't talked about is that different business models for different AV integration businesses lend themselves to one or another, right? You have more management heavy business models, or you have more labor heavy business models. And I think that there's an argument to be made that both can work, having internal programming staff or hybrid, or, using primarily outsourced, and just something to think about. And
going back, Alex, you were saying before about having a win-win-win. Part of our strategy is developing that relationship and maintaining the relationship. So there's been examples in the past where we've mostly been exclusive to a client in our, call it the US. And then there was a couple international cities where we have partners, but there was a couple examples where the cost through us was just a little bit higher than what they could go locally. And they decided they wanted to go locally. So we handed over everything. We gave them the drawings. We gave them the audio DSP files. We gave them our control source code and said, here, we're partners in this. So go give this to your other integrator and have them deploy consistent systems for you, because it's all about that relationship in the end of the day. And back briefly to your question before, Steve, whether it's internal programming resources or third party, it changes our process a bit, because when we're working with a third party, we have to be more strict in our timelines and our planning, which does help in the end of the day. Because if you plan for your in-house QA staging on a certain day, we better have those racks ready and wired and firmware ready to load that code when we're either going to have remote support from that third-party programmer or if they're going to come to our shop. And it's the same story once you're at the job site. It forces us into a more consistent pattern of timeliness.
Ben, you bring up such an excellent point around, handing over documentation and et cetera to local resources. And I think that really comes down into self-confidence and understanding your company's intrinsic value, right? And when we talk about relationships, it's really just, from our perspective is, where can we provide the most amount of value and where aren't we? And if we aren't providing the most amount of value comparative to other resources or people or companies, get the heck out of the way, And I think that smart AV integrators and smart business owners understand that, and they understand that, the days of we have a dealership, so the client has to buy this from us, and that whole attitude, I'm telling you, it is changing very, very quickly, and it's our job to deliver steady outcomes, reliable outcomes, but also as much intrinsic value to our clients as possible.
A big point too that I'm going to add that, that you were talking about when you hand over the documentation is that, of course I'm going to stump for the third party integrators because, Steve and I have made careers do it on this. And obviously we believe that's the model that's there. And because there's not a lot of companies that can afford to have, full-time programmers on staff. They're not cheap. If they're good, they're not cheap. So, that is a pretty significant overhead cost that you're talking about. So, again, if you're busy enough that you can go ahead and keep, basically high ticket employees going the entire time. But the problem then you have is, when do you train them? When do they work on other things? When do they cross train? When do they bring in other disciplines? Typically we found that, with third party companies, yes, absolutely, do the control system programming. Oh, by the way, we're versed in all four. Okay, so you get thrown a curveball and you need to use company X. Oh wait, a worldwide pandemic hit. None of X is available. Now we got to use Y and Z. No sweat, no problem. We've been doing that too. Oh, we lost our field engineer who did the DSP programming. No sweat. Great. I need somebody who does video calibrations. Cool. Great. It's the ability typically when you're outside of the day-to-day of the business is those companies are able to keep their skill set fresh. And there's a lot to be said about that, because when you have in-house people, you're there to get the job done. Like, we get it, right? But if you think about it, how many times have you been able to send them to certification training, re-upping their certification training? And even once you certify them, and I had to take one a couple of months ago to get refreshed on something. It was software I hadn't picked up in a couple of years. I was stumped for a bit, and I'd done it before, some pretty sophisticated stuff. And I had to kind of go back through and, kind of shake the rust out. You don't want an employee doing that on the clock, on deadline. So, again, those are kind of the intangibles. And a lot of times you're going to know how much the third-party integrator knows what they're doing. Because, my line always used to be is that, I used to tell clients, I said there was a period of time where I had like 3 accountants in a row. It just bang, bang, bang. It just wasn't working out. And ultimately the person that we wound up picking they looked at me and said, look, my job is to ask you the things that you don't know to ask. to begin with. If you were if you were already an expert at this, you wouldn't need me. So my goal is to walk in and spot what's missing and then point it out and say, how do you want to address this? And again, when, like you were talking about, if you've got deployments, you've got enterprise clients, you've got educational clients, you've got, all of these where you've got to deploy X, and you have your all hands on deck. But if you're in a full sprint the whole time as a company, one, you're not having fun. Two, you're not necessarily expanding your reach because you're just constantly driving to get that next one out, to get it done, to get it done, to get it done. A company will get fatigued and the in-house people will get fatigued. And so, it's also a matter of balancing, how can I give my people a breather? How can I let them be a better asset to me down the line instead of just got to chug this job out. We got 3 conference rooms next week, right? Yeah, I know that I was going to go ahead and send you to this, but this just came up. We had something fall in our lap. Every integrator I know, every time I sit in a production meeting, that's what happens. And we know it. And part of it is calling it, right? It's calling the realities of, look, you get those blinders on. Sometimes that outside influence helps, like Ben was saying, helps take the blinders off because you get lazy, right? You got people, your shorthand stuff. Oh, they'll figure it out when they're there because we did it at, Corporation XYZ 3 months ago, remember? The thing that I always hammer with integrators is like, don't piss off future you. For the love of God, don't piss off future you. When you come back 3 years later and you've lost 2 of those people, or you've had 50 jobs in between, and now you've lost all of that, top of the head information, you're hosed. Now you've lost the profitability of the job. You may have made it, year 1, but now 36 months later, I'm like, you just hemorrhaged all the profit you had because it's easy in the act of trying to get the job done. Like I said, Ben was saying, was to get away from your process because it's tough. Because again, it's we all know you got to get done. I mean, that's what keeps the doors open.
Yeah, totally. I think the nucleus of that is that AV integrators need to become better business operators. And I think that's what I'm alluding to is that, you mentioned it, Rich, in the beginning that a lot of, AV integration business started with a techie guy that got into business, right? And so they're more focused on the technology and less so on, the business side. And certainly Steve and I have had a couple conversations around that as far as business owners ourselves. But really if there's one thing I would want to pass on to other business operators is that the time is now to invest in looking at all of these things, whether it be third-party programming or, business operating systems, or just really reevaluating. I think we're going through a big shift here. And we certainly saw it through COVID where, the tide went out and the people that were wearing shorts or not were certainly seen. And unfortunately, that meant that some companies weren't able to make it. And I don't foresee this business getting any easier. As a matter of that fact, I remind myself every day that this is hard. This is supposed to be hard, and it's only going to get harder. This is as easy as it's ever going to be is right now. And so we need to really evaluate, all of these different areas, including third-party programming, to understand, where can we become better business operators.
I'm going to jump in just because I think it's a good place for us to pause, but it sounds like a great conversation. And thank you, Alex. And that's a really good place for us to words to live by moving forward. But I think that this is a conversation like many of our others that will be continued. And I'd love to have both Ben and Alex back to and continue this conversation. And I'm sure Rich would agree. For now, Alex, can you tell people how to get in touch with you and learn more about your company, NDS Integration?
Yeah, we're online on the interwebs at ndsav.com. You can find me active on Twitter as well, providing my thoughts about mostly AV, sometimes business, and a little bit of soccer with my daughter. So, or X if you want to call it that, whatever. I still call it Twitter.
What is your handle?
The Alex Fortin with a 3 instead of an E.
And Ben, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about Verrex?
Best way for me personally is LinkedIn, just looking up Ben Dandola-Grubb, and then Verrex is Verrex. Just look up Verrex.com. Headquartered in New Jersey, but we're doing projects worldwide. Traditionally, mostly corporate, but we've been doing more and more higher education as well over the past few years as opportunities have arisen.
And if you haven't heard some of our past episodes, we've had one of Verrex's programmers, Brian McGrogan, on. So please check those out as well. And you could hear some of his insights. He's a great contributor to the show. And last but not least, Rich, how can people get in touch with you, and any final words that you wanted to share?
Yeah, you can find me on the interwebs, Fregosa Design, the company, at Art Fregosa, on the X or Twitters, on some of the technical Facebook posts on Discord, et cetera, lots of resources out there. But yeah, I mean, a big part of it is that whether you are an in-house programmer or a third-party programmer, it's you're gonna want to develop your skill set, and if you are in-house and you want to grow it, that's the opportunity to come internally, even to your people, and say, hey, look, I need to build my skill set as well. And the good news about the integrator programmer relationship, whether it's in-house or third party, is you need one another. And I think that from the business operator standpoint, the one thing that I've always said is that what we do is hard enough. Making sure that you actively focus on loving what you do and loving who you're working with is just as equally important. And we kind of sometimes lose perspective of it, after those late nights and those deadlines. But it's okay to love the process and really enjoy being around and working with friends. And again, I think that's a big part of it, is that these relationships, if you do them right, are wonderful partnerships and friendships over the years that, you learn that you've got people in your corner. And the only way you get through that is by expanding your reach to get more of them in there.
Well said. And I was going to add, and I'll do it very briefly, is that the independent programmer community is also very supportive of each other. And there's very few of us who feel that we compete, and we mostly have collaborative relationships, and we help each other and we refer each other. So it's a great resource to tap into. Not that I'm giving a commercial for it, but but the relationships is the key element there that Rich mentioned. And many of us have very strong relationships with the clients that we work with. For me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media, my company Control Concepts at controlconcepts.net. And what's most important, and Rich always says this, is visit avnation.tv to find out more about this show and all the other shows on the network. There's a lot of verticals that are covered and a lot of great content that's being put out there. So please check them out. Rich and I have been guests on AV Week as well as Resi Week, and you can catch those shows as well. And EdTech's another great resource if you want to learn more about that side of the industry, and great insights from technology managers. And but please also let us know what you think about this show. If you'd like to be a guest, leave us a rating, review. We want to hear from you, and we'd like to include more voices and make sure we're covering more topics. And thank you, Alex, for reaching out and connecting and offering up this topic. It was a great conversation. So more of that to come. And this has been A State of Control,
the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.